we'll get started in the next like 2 to 3 minutes, y'all. Just kind of finishing up the technical side. If you see someone who is, or if you notice that one of your peers is not here, who needs to be here, please ping them separately. Y'all are good friends, so, do the friend thing where you, communicate. All right, live stream link is live. I'm gonna share this. Who is the respectively, like the speakers, who is like the 1A, 2A, 1N, 2N?
I'm the 1A.
I'm the 2N.
Nice, nice, nice. All right, that link has been sent. All right, cool. I'm gonna do the thing where I talk for a little bit, and then y'all can take over and do what's intended. Perfect. Awesome. All right, y'all. Welcome back to another pro demonstration debate hosted by Debate Boutique. We're super excited to be able to offer and have these debates for not only our students, but students across the community. Demonstration debates are an excellent resource and aid to kind of show students, one, what are either better ways of doing what they do, or ways to enhance what is already great about their technique, and or two, just having or seeing folks who are either your lab leaders or folks that you look up to in the community be people, make critical strategic errors, make critical strategic, brilliant moments. Being able to see that in interactivity is super cool. And so this is now, I think, our third demonstration debate. So if you have missed any in the past, definitely go back to check those out. We had one with like the AF versus a plethora of next strategies, but going for the critique later in the 2 and R, featuring Anna, of course, which we're so happy to have you back doing this. So much debate, Anna. We love that. And then we had I'm about to say your name again. A novice demonstration debate that had a lot of instructional flow techniques, breaking down the debate that Anna also hosted, which was great. A lot of feedback from folks saying that they're going to take that back to their novice squads because it was really helpful in being able to flow and understand what all was happening. And now today we have the K+FWK versus framework versus what am I saying? Oh my gosh, rewind. Those words didn't make sense. The critical F versus framework and the K+FWK negative strategy. What ends up being gone for in the 2 and R? I don't know. I guess you're going to find out. I think that the debate is what determines that. But super excited to watch these phenomenal folks engage in a debate. We have on the affirmative Julian Kufor, who just gave a great lecture on cybernetics and water. And then we have K+FWK, their cousin, hey, who is a DB consultant for the summer, as well as NDT semifinalist, as well as just, you know, an intellectual. And so I'm super excited for the two of them on the affirmative to show us how it is done on the, from University of Pittsburgh, K+FWK, University of Southern California, Julian. On the negative, we have Anna Bittner from the University of Wake Forest, or if I should say, hashtag Go Deeks. I feel like any kind of Wake Forest person would really appreciate me saying that right now. So yes, it's a rising junior, first round participant. All of these folks, besides a wonderful Jean, who is new to the game of, I think, are you debating in college, Jean? Is that happening? Yep, so you're about to enter into the fire very, very soon. But all these folks are really great at debate. And then lastly, we have Jean, who just graduated from Calvert Hall High School. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, and I'm going to Wake next year.
And it's going, look at this, all of this deep energy. It's really a lot, but I'm super excited. This seems like a classic showdown of the K+FWK versus framework debate coming from Wake Forest. So y'all take copious notes, flow. And at the end of this debate, there'll be an IG, so Instagram for folks who are, you know, that goes beyond you, Instagram voting poll on our stories that you can say who won, the affirmative or the negative. They're going to make that really hard for you to decide, because you're going to see some really great debating happening. So I'm going to stop talking and let this debate take place. So yeah, without further ado, y'all, let's do it. Oh, can y'all drop the documents, either K+FWK into the 4-week? So
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Yeah, y'all enjoy.
Okay, y'all should have it. Is everybody good to go? Give me a thumbs up. Julian, are you good? Wonderful. Also, I do not have a physical timer, so you're not going to hear it go off, but I do got a timer. What is it like to be thirsty while surrounded by water? The long array of black thirst binds the contemporary violence of shutoffs, pollution, and droughts to the historical ecology of the slave ship. The drowning of hundreds of slaves aboard the Zong is a story that can only be told by untelling the resolution's conventional account of water resource protection, Liang in 16. Detroit's Water and Sewage Department announced it would begin shutting off water access to clients with outstanding accounts. The city saw its massive backlog as an opportunity to generate additional revenue. These water shutoffs disproportionately affected the city's low-income and African-American residents. Water access for commercial and industrial account holders remain untouched. This sharp asymmetry of access is best captured by a single question. What is it like to be thirsty when one is surrounded by water? In 1781, the British slave ship Zong set sail from the west coast toward Jamaica, carrying 470 slaves. The ship exhausted its supplies of water. Many of the enslaved died. Captain Collingwood instructed his crew to throw overboard and summarily drown another 130 slaves. He determined that the massacre would prove to be more financially advantageous to the owners. The ship's owners filed an insurance claim. The insurance denied the claim, and the owners filed a suit in a case that was adjudicated in their favor. For Phillips' collection of poems, racial slavery initiates and maintains certain relations fundamental to our ongoing environmental crises. The thirst initiated radical ecology that gestures toward another mode of being human. Language structures our encounters with slavery. The fact that the transcript of Gregson v. Gilbert provides our only substantive access speaks to the general lack of knowledge that marked the middle passages of sight, marked by silence of those slaves who remain objects but not subjects. Any work performed in the archive of slavery is predicated upon impossibility and intent on achieving an impossible goal, redressing the bonds that produce numbers, ciphers, and fragments of discourse. It is only by untelling the official account, by disconnecting letters within words, words within sentences within paragraphs, the loss is found to be rupture of the middle passages or released from their fixed representations. Ships frequently incubated toxic environments. Animals, plants, and diseases develop new migratory pathways via terrestrial and oceanic slaving routes. Environmental theory is not immune to the historically given laws of language. The history of modern racial slavery in its afterlives is also the history of environmental politics and thought. Environmental politics and thought. Now, the history of water is inextricably tied to blackness's endless transfiguration to a space of necessary risk. The drive for water protection policy invests in a calculus of dispossession and in the accumulation of black flesh for the creation notion of secure and protected society. Sharp in 16. The history of insurance begins with the sea. 3 developments are central: the bottom agreement or sea loan, in which money is loaned to the sea for aid for the voyage, the risk falling to the lender. Second, the concept of general average, the idea that losses undertaking to save a boat represent a risk shared among those investing in a voyage. And third, in the notion of perils of the sea, the earliest form of insurable risk, the risk in insurance, the asterisk human, shipability, and containerization, and what is in excess of those states. I want to think trans in a variety of ways that try to get at something about or toward the range of transformations enacted on and by Black bodies. The asterisk after the prefix trans holds the place open for thinking and speaks as well to a range of embodied experiences called gender, into Euro-Western genders, dismantling its inability to hold Black flesh. This topic is an attempt to mediate water resource protection through state politics, belies the symbolic value inherent in the ejection of Black thirst from the bounds of humanism. Water resources are mediated by an economy of speculative finance that values Black life only as a fungible spectrality. In each debate, Black thirst is invoked so that it can be quenched merely at the level of speculative imagination, only for it to reappear again by the end of the RFD. This exercise conceals that the problem of racialized thought is not rooted in the materiality of distribution, but in the exclusion of Blackness through the category of the human. Liang in 16. The Zong case played a pivotal role by speculating about the value they would have generated their imagined exchange. Finance capital ensures not only its objects, but its capacity to value and to guarantee the value of objects, regardless of either their thingly existence or their actual marketplace exchange. The edifice of modern finance is built on the violent erasure of Black bodies that is not only condoned by anticipated producing an economy in which Blackness circulates precisely as a form of disappearance, a spectral Blackness. Any recognition of the slaves as former bearings, as sons, daughters, friends, and partners is foreclosed. The Africans on board the Zong must be named. We should read these names as additional underwriters of the text to counter the calculation of value necessary to speculative finance. According to these proceedings, rainfall had resupplied the ship with enough drinking water so as to make the further killing of slaves unnecessary. Nevertheless, slaves were still thrown overboard after the rains had fallen, begging the question of what, well beyond the captain's morbid fiduciary self-interest, motivated the additional murders. Lord Mansfield deliberately ignored the law. The slaves status as an empty bearers of an abstract, theoretical, but entirely real quantum of value. Both the law and the system of speculative finance and scaffolds treat the slave as if they were already dead until they resurrect them to fortify the boundaries of the human. Now, the resolution views ecology through a colonial regime of sight and evaluation that locks Black life into a grid of nobility and conquest. Blackness exists outside of the toxic zones of the settlement. Plantation thus has the infinite potential for an ecological futurity outside of captivity. King in 16. Poetics make the ineffable and academic theory visible and sayable. Indigo chemical elements seeped into the pores of the enslaved. These scars index orders of violence exceeding the human eye, as well as ideations of slavery as labor. As fungible bodies, Black bodies are porous and can merge with nature and create new kinds of flesh. Black porous flesh represents an alternative orientation in relation to objects, plants, human and non-human elements. The regime of colonial visuality hides aspects of conquest like genocide. Specifically, the regime obscures and invisibilizes the genocide of the Cherokee people of the Sea Islands through the rubric of labor. Once native bodies are eliminated, they are removed from the landscape of the plantation. The plantation and the settlement emerge simultaneously through mutually constituting forms of violence. Attending to the poorest offers us a new kind of sight as an analog unit of conquest where the multiple violences of enslavement and genocide both emerge. Imagine that in even more secluded locations, such as under the covering of or behind the shed, a therapeutic massage or amorous touch on a forearm might open up possibilities for sexual and or healing encounters. In this context of other Black possibilities, the simple pleasure of Black solitude, anticipation of non-work related interaction, satisfaction with the making of preliminary plans for rebellion are beyond fulfillability, and yet refashions life where human life is not supposed to thrive. The slave ship is the ecology of thirst in which one's access to water polices the borders of the colonial line that define humanity as Western man. The resolution locks water policy within the narrative structure of historical time, which mystifies the ontological time of Black thirst as a perpetual condition of barred relationality. Ballots under the normative topical model reinforce a repertoire of behaviors that biochemically attune to the anti-Black conception of water as resource. This produces an illusion of stasis that binds the topic predictable limits within the right grammar of resource protection, and the coherence of those discussions guaranteed by relegating the racialized perils of water to the unthought. Thus, we affirm a political ontology of Black perpetual thirst by centering Zong's poetic deconstruction of water policy as the disavowed core of the topic. Liang in 16. Racialization intervenes in biochemical processes to reproduce and reinforce anti-Black ideologies at the level of the body. Water and one's access and relationship to it retains a singular place. Thirst is fundamental of an organism's regulatory system. Water was the critical common denominator of survival, which obliged the sailors to disavow the universality of thirst. The sciences provided the rationale for this natural causation by elevating nature to a group of extra-human laws that dictate behavior through genetics. The mechanisms of man have concentrated on establishing Black populations as inferior. All our present struggles with respect to race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and ethnicity, struggles over the environment, global warming, severe climate change, the sharply unequal distribution of the Earth's resources. These are all differing facets of the central ethnic class man versus human struggle, with all incoming new non-white/non-Black groups coming to claim normal identity by putting visible distance between themselves and the Black population group. To be man means to be non-Black. Any additional slave thrown overboard after the rains reinforce the thirst of the remaining slaves is a permanent condition of absolute necessity. Abolitionist rhetoric emphasized number of slaves because murder of one would likely prove insufficient to rouse white sympathies. Focus on this number also confined the event to a timeline that was resolved by abolition abolition of trade. The slave's time enables non-slaves to materialize by providing illusion of stasis. A fundamental antagonism between the slave and the human generates a grammar of suffering. The slave is generally dishonored, perpetually open to gratuitous violence, void of kinship structure. Our analysis cannot be approached through the rubric of gains or reversals and struggles with the state and civil society. The racialized experience of water not only became reasonable grounds for treating the slaves as less than human, but also protected the value created by by that treatment. It is hardly surprising that in the middle of the putative water crisis, Detroit began soliciting proposals for the large-scale privatization of its water and sewer systems. Thus, the affirmative endorses the Black feminist epistemology in which we displace the geography of the transatlantic slave trade, creating creative new frameworks for understanding Black life. McKittrick and Six, Black lives are geographic, but circle with discourse that erase and despatialize their sense of place. The language and concreteness of geography must be conceptualized as always bringing into view material reference and actions taking place in space as the overlap of subjectivities, imagination, stories. The work and Black geographies recognize that the overlaps between materiality and language are lengthening in the diaspora, and racial displacement is in contradistinction to and evidence of the ongoing critique of both geography and the ungeographic. Openings are made possible for envisioning an interpretive, alterable world rather than a transparent and knowable world. Mark the card at world.
All right, you good?
Yeah.
All right, first question, who is the we in the plan?
Who is the we in the plan? I think that we means Julian and I, at least in this context, but we think that we
I have another question. You said the plan text says you affirm a political ontology. What does that entail?
So before I answer that, I think it's odd that you're using the phrase plan text. We have not offered
Got
that
it.
kind of imposition.
So what's the better term to use then?
I don't think that I think that kind of goes into the F, which is that it's not a question of providing terminology that can be used, but kind of refiguring the terminology that's already used in the resolution.
Okay, so but I have a follow-up question to that. So if you're reconfiguring terminology that is used that doesn't exactly apply because it's not precise enough, so what would a better language be, given that your McKittrick evidence indicates that you establish new networks for understanding your relationship to space that doesn't apologize Black life? So what terminology do you use then to establish those networks?
Right. So again, our argument has been that kind of gridding Black life on a frame of knowability, or one in which everyone can dictate what a Black person is doing at one time or another, is the kind of category that is used in the case of the Zong in Detroit, et cetera, to mark how Black people are interacting with water and then generate speculative value out of that. That's why
I have a follow-up question, if that's okay, or because I only have so much time left. How does the AF engage with the Zong's poetic deconstruction beyond reading the poetry? What are the tactics that are engaged in by the affirmative? What does it mean to create those new networks?
Two things. Again, it's about that kind of grid of knowability. So our affirmative creates those new networks insofar as that reading allows us to generate new understandings of those existing terms, right? I think that the way that the affirmative gets used, the way that we can use it to resolve fungibility for ourselves are examples in which the affirmative kind of generates those tactics without it already being known in advance. Hence why
I have a follow-up question. So you said it's about, you explained it's about a new understanding of terms for ourselves and how we understand them. What does that do then in the instance of the Detroit water crisis, where there are industries who are shutting off water for populations that need to have access to clean and usable water? How does that
I think that's a wonderful question, considering that most of the policy solutions that are offered, well, I'd say all rather, end up ignoring the conditions of those Black people and pathologize.
I'm not asking what the status quo does. I'm asking what the affirmative does then instead.
Right. So our argument is that we provide a lens or a grammar by which Black people can organize beyond utilizing kind of existing state solutions, which is.
Got it. So what's an example of that?
Was an example of that. I think first is the kind of affirmation of perpetual thirst, to understand that water is not something that's always offered to one another, and then there needs to be a kind of interpersonal sharing, right? A kind of fluid relation to water that understands it as a collective item rather than a resource to be utilized or to be protected.
So water is a collective item?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. I have one last question. I'm happy to take
an item that has multiplicity.
I'm happy to take 15 seconds of prep for this. So you indicated that the affirmative creates networks that don't pathologize Black life. How do you ensure that? And what are the ways in which you prevent pathologization from occurring in this re-understanding?
I don't think that that's what we're saying. I think that we allow Black people to embrace that pathology and then continue to make politics that are good for us within it, instead of trying to avoid pathology itself, right? We turn it into something that can be like a healing practice that we can all collectively come together around.
Got it. Sounds good. Well, we can count that as like 15 seconds used, so it doesn't really matter. Jean's gonna send out the 1 and C.
Yeah, it's 2 and then case. Let me know when everyone's good.
Let me really quickly send this or add this to the Discord for all the folks who are following along. All right. For all of the kids at Debate Boutique, that should be in the Discord for the 4-week now.
All right. Can I just get a quick thumbs up from everyone before I start? Julian, are you good? First off is T interpretation. Topical affirmatives must result in the increase of the United States federal government's protection of water resources in the United States. Ace, the point is the act of the federal government is in DC and Contra on line and 5. The federal government of the US is centered in DC. The text of the resolution calls for debate on hypothetical government action means the act of the F has to be the US of G. Erickson and 3. Each topic contains K. Other ones to enter doing the act. US in the US should is the subject. The verb should means to put a policy into action through governmental means. The debate about whether something ought to occur. B. The point is the mechanism protection of water resources. The government water management. Cody Schneider and Tina and 17 Congress addresses the nation's water resources and has enacted hundreds of water-related federal laws. These include droughts and floods, oversight over management, infrastructure, and protected wildlife. C. The point is the object water resources exclude the oceans, United Nations, and 3 water resources are the water found in fresh and brackish surface and groundwater bodies with national territory. The water of oceans and open seas is excluded, especially because it's is possessive and refers to the party preceding its use. The USFG, US District Court, instead of the word it's intended to refer to the party preceding use. D. The point is jurisdiction. It means within the limits of observing 6 use to indicate inclusion, location, or position within the United States refers to all areas of U.S. jurisdiction. Rainy and 95 of the term U.S. means all areas under the jurisdiction or authority thereof. Our impact is debatability. 3 internal links. First is limits. Abounded topic services. A predictable stasis point for debates that guarantee a thematic coherence. Absent defined limits. Debates competitive incentives create races and margins that distort topic researchers. Second is ground. A predefined controversy ensures a vibrant lit base and in-depth clutch, but it's unreasonable to prepare for alternative frameworks with the ground allocated by the parameters of the resolution. All 2 AC defenses come rule out in concessionary grounds, which isn't a stable basis for a year of debate. Third, new after a voting issue undermine negative preparation, prevent in-depth discussion of the merits of left. Second off is the K. The affirmative is riddled with leftist melancholia. Debate is a massive network of scholars, activists, policymakers, all of whom can and should orient their energy towards the production of a better world. The presumption that we should not challenge structures on the level of scope and scale with the resources that debate offers us is an explicit concession to fascism. Vote negative on presumption regardless of the benefits of their method. For them, fragmented politics are fundamentally non-unique and non-inherent. Husserl and a growing emphasis on fragmentations and single issue politics and avoiding totalist injustice and structural analysis of capitalism. The differences between that which is opposed and the strategies to oppose the generative of disempowerment. Capitalism's power is therefore is therefore identified as a totality. On the other hand, this year celebrate local, fragmented, and partial forms of knowledge as the only forms of other and criticize big picture thinking for its potentially oppressive applications that cannot serve as a basis to contest neoliberal capitalism. Persistent abstraction, anxiety hanging over progressive politics, and renewed appetite for ambitious and future-oriented emancipatory politics has begun to make itself calls to build an intellectual infrastructure capable of creating a new ideology, economic and social models. Nothing can be exempted in advance of the enactment of revisionary processes. Sociogenic analysis divides worker struggles against capitalism because it focuses on non-material epistemic claims which are impossible to understand without looking at capitalism's emphasis on personal freedoms to believe what you want, while the dictatorship of the bourgeois continues. Henry in 2000, what would be the cause of political thought of the shift of the category replacing the Marxian key of the mode of production? It would be taken by autopoetic superposition imprecision of the substance totality compared to the mode of production. The differences in nature and precision societies struggling with economic development difficult to shift and make importance of political economy to post-colonial thought is indicated by the wide influence of post-colonial economists. This route is not sufficiently recognized semiotic variety for strict autonomy with economic ability to resist original cultural construction, systematic underrepresenting of the relationship between the categorical and institutional repositioning of political economy suggests in practice not able to control the discursive tendencies towards finding categories of language, science systems, and discursive processes inconsistent consistent with the call for decentralization of the differences and temporalities of categorical discursive and institutional structures continue to grow after the legitimating arguments have been deconstructed. Categorical processes have limited influence over institutional self-perseverance, the dynamics of their own for the categorical political evidence, which is analysis of state social that some examination moves exclusively on the categorical level fails to address the patterns of state domination and other institutional structurality. The need for institutional analysis is going to getting around the military. The categorical deconstructing of the above opposition could not have within this hegemony underrepresentation and the moral definition are not under control of autonomy of human cognition. These words like cognitive autonomy belong to the distant future. Need epistemics now. The real political consequences. New projects of reconstruction will continue to be formulated in states of semi-conscious awareness. Capitalism generates a present of differentially distributed mass violence, environmental destruction, extinction, Robinson 14. The origins of global crisis are founded in accumulation and contradictions. They power crisis in any one place represent crisis for the system. I can't view them of other law through dimensions of climate change to the impending collapse of centralized agricultural, threatening the ability of billions of people to survive. This is fast-reaching ecological limits of its reproduction of others. Unprecedented computerized origins, bunker buster, moms, there's a vast post-population, and the need for the productive countries subject to control and destruction, prison, industrial, and immigrant destruction complexes, omnipresent policing, militarized gentrification, the spread of WMD, and militarization makes it hard to enter the system of unstable political authority. The ultra-right is insurgent of false militarism, masculinization, homophobia, racism, racist mobilization, 21st century fascism, normalizing the rises warfare there, cessation of revolutionary institution building abdicates the potential for true communal power, reducing revolution to reactive versus of energy. This debate must be a question of the speed, scope, and scale of revolutionary strategy. Only dual power organizing can build institutions that meet the material need of the community and constructive revolutionary base in the face of compounding crises of climate change, imperialism, and fascism. Escalante and 19th dual power because masses institutions will can provide for the material needs of the capitalist, socialist, agricultural, and food distribution progress that count that seeds by meeting needs while providing social self-management and political institutions can function independently, not only saving lives but demonstrating possibility for a revolutionary project. We have 12 years so that will not prevent catastrophic climate change. We are in a post-punk road. The question is not whether we can escape climate change, but survive. The tech cannot combat crisis. Energy infrastructure requires constant militarism from warfare. Imperial states compete for spheres of influence to facilitate cheap resource extraction. We must build a movement with infrastructure which we can survive the revolution. The Marxist center, developing socialist institutions through tenants, organizing and serve for the people program mutual aid is not enough. We cannot make capitalism survivable. We must make these institutions part of revolutionary prefiguration. They have to be linked together to the revolutionary movement. Towards revolutionary ends, purpose has to be radicalized, the meeting the needs of the communities in which operates revolutionary institutions, provide food, housing, and build a base thus alternatives to affirm the model of the Communist Party. Only democratic centralist dual power organizing provide effective accountability mechanisms to correct unproductive tendencies, educate and mobilize marginalized communities, and conduct political struggles to movement towards international liberation. Escalante and 18 base building and dual power strategies push forward the party organizing that allowed to solidify a powerful revolutionary social tendency. Revolution is not currently possible to have a response to building institutions to meet people's needs to demonstrate communists, offer relief from capitalism to mobilize the base. We need to have already done the work of building a communist party, build institutional power, and the dream of communism have a public basic communist party which is unified around the party allowing democratic centralism, decision making for holding party accountable, unifying action, and for educating they empower communities to theorize through communist while organizing to fight for the liberation of formal structures, allow individual locals to have a voice and open debate, but allow for a unified strategy. Party organizing allows for organizers to be held accountable, allows criticism to function with unity, working to sharpen strategies to correct chauvinist ideas and accountability is crucial. Imperialist and including ideal. In fact, the first organizing creating formal procedure allows us to adjust these consistent problems, organizational to adopt party models alongside recruitment, education, and communist practices and military party cadres defending institutional states are by building organization to a national party. Unified national party will be a long-term goal. Case uniqueness, unconscious bias exists, but it's not a libidinal economy, psychoanalytic explanation, so specific social and cultural value system confused happen within synthesis and 15 races not an integral part of the human psyche, social contract of the psyche, impact any effort to comprehend racism by reference to an a priori structure, be it edible or collective unconscious is doomed to the collective unconscious of inherited patterns that exist all regardless of the specific upbringing. If not discuss the exclusion side of primitive features of the mind, they are habit acquired from social cultural impositions. They constitute a collective unconscious on the part of the brain. They're not universal. That confuses happen within its socioeconomic responsible for the affective disturbance and can be self and psychological of the individual and social disalienation only achieve materialist sense resume their rightful place. I'm good for cross-sex.
Before cross-sex starts, y'all, just for the folks who are looking at the docs, can you let them know if you did get to all the case cards?
No, I did not. I just read the first card.
All right, so y'all heard that? Just the first card on case, okay? All right, sorry, commence.
Okay, I first want to start on the Cap K. What does your critique of the affirmative do to orient your energy towards producing a better world, as you said?
I don't really understand what the question is getting at.
Your first argument on that sheet is that debate is a network of scholars, activists, etc., that all should point our energy toward producing a better world, but we're riddled with leftist melancholia. I'd like to know what your criticism in this debate does to create the better world, right? How does that lead to the creation of the Communist Party that you affirm?
Yeah, like the last piece of Escalante evidence talks about how within like academic forums, we have to re-educate and convince people to organize their energies to combating capitalism.
So your critique is an act of convincing me, is that it, or the judge or the room?
I don't know if that's like the best like terminology, but like the proliferation of like anti-capitalist like praxis and education.
So it's that we
a good
were
way to orient ourselves.
Right.
No, I mean like that's not like the link argument. You asked what the alt does. I said what the alt does.
What's the link?
I mean, like we read a couple pieces of evidence. I can just like kind of go through them if you would like.
What did the app do that prevents building a communist party? Please explain. Like I know that you read a document, but what did the app do that's bad?
I mean, like the second piece of evidence, the Henry evidence, I believe, is like a really long explanation of how sociogenetic orientations towards the world.
Can you explain that to me now, or am I just supposed to debate the evidence?
I mean, like, I'm trying to explain it. Like,
so okay. I'm gonna jump in a little bit to help out. So the 1NC read multiple pieces of evidence, and yes, Kudra, you should totally debate the evidence because it's awesome. The first evidence, Hester, is a question of how you formulate your strategies. The Hester evidence indicates that verticalism is essential to not only establish different parties and have accountability mechanisms, but also allow for a single issue focus that enables better forms of accountability when capital collapse happens in a variety of ways.
What about the AF trades off with like a single issue focus? What
are we? So first of all, it's not just a question of a trade-off link. It's not just like a PC disad. Rather, this is a question of how we orient struggle towards different solutions, towards different impacts in the United, towards different impacts that matter. The affirmative in 1AC Cross X made pretty clear that you don't need to be held accountable or list those different tactics because rather you're advocating for a lens or a new change of grammar.
I said that
that's what we're criticizing. We also have the Henry link that, if you want me to explain.
Wait, really quick, what is the single issue?
So it's not just the. Let me rephrase and re-explain what I was saying because I don't want to get my words like out of order. The argument we were making is that the sole focus on a new lens or grammar or about the ways in which that water policy has historically been pathologizing is a bad frame to take because when capital collapse impacts every single individual, that's not what's going to keep us afloat when the oceans are rising. That's not how we can survive any of these different impacts that are going to hurt everybody, especially the communities that you've isolated in the 1AC.
Okay.
We've also read other link evidence that I'm sure Gene can explain or I can explain.
We're good. Do you need prep?
No. Case, framework, cat. You just sent.
I'm going to take some instructional prep though real quick. To some folks who have been asking for the docs, I believe Tommy posted those. Am I correct, Tommy? Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
So look to that. Okay. Instructional prep over.
Is it 8 or 9?
My friend, it's 8 minutes up in here.
Okay. Damn, gotta go fast.
Gene has the ultimate advantage in this.
What do you say?
I said Gene has the ultimate advantage in this. Y'all have been debating on 9 minutes for a minute now. Gene, welcome back to my world. That 1 minute difference.
For real. I'm not fast enough for the old 1 minute less. Are we all good? Doc, download, excellent. Gene, Kudra. Awesome. Gonna get started in like 5 seconds after no verbal interruption. The boundaries of the human are policed by the regulatory power of water policy and the containerization of Black life into objecthood. Blackness is reduced to a linguistic disappearance, denied the subjective capacity to define terms like water, no longer a fluid that sustains human life, but instead constitutive of a vast expanse of the transatlantic that defines the condition of Black captivity. This is to say that Blackness is the disavowed core of the topic, the constitutive exclusion upon which the world is produced on top of Black objection, largely conceded fungibility impact. It is independent offense that you can hang your hat on at the end of the debate as something the assholes, regardless of how we're doing at the end, are on the other pages, but it's something we'll win. They've reified via their performance and their metaphysical commitment to materiality at the expense of Black psychic life, Black people to the negative, or objects, not people, but chess pieces to be moved around the board of debate and social life as white people see fit, is materially exemplified by the slave trade in which Black folks are reduced to commodity status, a subhuman entity to be traded in the global financial marketplace, but also linguistically exemplified by practices that posit Black folks in scenes wherein white activists use the trace of Black fungibility as a jumping off point in justification for the radicality, producing a savior logic wherein the good whites need to rescue Blackness from itself or its inevitable doom at the hands of whiteness and white supremacy, acting as a psychic palliative for changing the reality of white desire and allowing white people to portray themselves as ethical and instrumentalizing policy solutions to problem thought, vote after a political ontology of Black thirst, no solvency argument, and the one that sees so bar one in the block instead of seeing water and Black folks as insurable objects that can be imbued with financial properties like exchange value and price. We should prefer a practice of Black space making that reinverts pathology by redirecting negativity towards a paradigm that sees policy and planning as the end-all be-all of ensuring the perpetuity of Black life. Voting AF enables healing and therapeutic moves not normally countenanced by humanism, opening up the possibility for Black rebellion and holding space for one another, which takes the grease off the gears of humanism by translating energy from its capturable form to a non-manipulable kinetic force that utilizes poetics to create new relationships with plants, nature, water, and community, which occurs through embracing the structural position of Blackness within its inevitable demise, as opposed to the key to a solution to its negation. Line by line, Hunis is wrong one, turn bias theory individualizes racism and double turns the right evidence that they might read in the block because it generates a progress narrative about white people being less individually racist without understanding and structurally transforming anti-Blackness. Two, it's offense for us because we understand fungibility not as the defining matrix of Black suffering, but a particular instance of multiplicity where different forms of Black life cross with water and other people's experiencing racial violence. Three, we are right about the liberal economy. We'll explain below in the case. Something to keep in mind is that they haven't read a link or impact to this argument, so you should bar one in the block, and two means that it fails the Y test because there's no implication even if they win this argument for the rest of the debate. The framework argument one, counterinterpretation, debaters should use the resolution as a jumping off point, not an endpoint. Interpretive paradigm creates a linguistic disappearance of Blackness wherein Black people are turned into objects of the topic discussed purely through structural violence impacts and are pathologized for theorizing resistance, but our knowledge is extracted to inform the topic. You should prefer an interpretation that lets Black people subjectively define the terms of their own existence. Prefer interpretations as Aurelian 98 in those kids with this board now needs to develop a country and it has made to the producer and organization control over the annotational media, the message, the differences in class race, culture in general, likely not related power relations, drive versus religious, reading those trying to type of polygamy that gets conflict over that doesn't matter, regards rebellion because the authors tend to be complicate the assumptions of resistance readings to be universally rejected as misinterpretations. Offense one, negative epistemology DA, given that anti-Blackness is undergirded by a paradigm of risk assessment framework in the topic, replicate an anti-Black predictive logic framework, plugs Blackness in as a bug to the code of debate that immediately scripts Black thought as a risk to the linear progression of debate into the future, which must be resolved through the manipulation of Blackness through policy as abstract containers of violence, which implicates the TVA because the content must be distorted to match our model, which removes the application of lived reality and collective memory to the debate and means that we ask questions about Black people, not Blackness. Two, pornotroping DA, they did and will do it. Stop. King in 19 embody acrisms, different kinds of futures and temporalities conjured in the whole world, kinds of impossible notions of Black future, years and animated as a body desire, desperation, hope, and decision, and kinetic energy create the body as an effect. Critical theories and their methodology chosen see only the effect of the body of Black desire, world making radical features of body is importantly epistemological problem presented by the lens of visuality and perception of individuality as a perception anchor. The body does not become the primary field of orientation for the social world in order based on somatic or body reasoning, the will of the flesh that precedes the body. Defense one, KVK debates have third and fourth level testing arguments regardless of resolution ties disproves the necessity of beginning with the federal government to class two. Competition is not the only thing that matters. Not all debaters are only here to win, and consenting to participation does not mean that one equivocally believes in procedure is substantiated by the unionist argument on the K+FWK, which says that some debaters come for revolutionary world building strategies and other stuff. Whatever, going to stop being awkward. Three, it's not a new F. We caught it. One, we meet. It was disclosed. So it tells all their offense. Two, counterinterpretation. We get them. Three, anything else stifles F ground and innovation because it means games can't bring new arguments. Four, they are inevitable. No threshold for newness. So that's terminal defense. Cap K1, objecthood DA, the alternative in the negative performance mimics the linguistic or racial Blackness from the capacity of subjecthood. It's a simple double bind. Either the alternative provisions water and resource access for niggas by white folks, which is the logic of white saviorism, wherein Black folks are able to deem themselves, or wherein white
white folks are able to deem themselves ethical revolutionary subjects by helping out black folks and justifies perm you do you, we do us, solves other offense because black participation in the alternative is unnecessary, or black folks must participate in the alternative, which is instructive logic that clears anti-blackness because anyone who does not want to participate or cannot participate is deemed a race and class traitor and devalued as the obstacle to effective communist revolution. Read or King evidence is applicable here too. Perm do both. Blackness underscores risk because economics see black folks as insurable objects to accumulate and treat as risk. The paradigm of speculative risk assessment that clears things like predictive policing and surveillance that extracts data from black folks is normalized through the capitalist valuation of information as a means of integration into the economy, which is why black folks who deviate from policy and planning are deemed as threats to the future and the planet. This means that the ass analytic is a necessary corrective to the anti-black logics of the alternative and their theory of power. 3, wrong about the world. Manipulation of thirst precedes the external world in the material economy. Capital generates value by constantly anticipating and ensuring against the maneuvers of black fugitives in space. The speculative economic capacity logic that results in gentrification, extraction of valued resources for extra capital. Their theory should make you question, do black people in the world of the alternative only get water by being dependent on white people to satiate our thirst? It turns and outweighs the K because it creates the same consumption and production logic that treats certain bodies as disposable unless they create common value, which is why black communities receive the least from mutual aid but provide the most for white people. The liberal economy is right and it precedes the political economy, which is demonstrated by the prioritization of white desire over the law and the utilization of black fungibility as a means of challenging standing and white supremacy are dropped. Lord Mansfield example proves this true because their theory and their Hoodist evidence cannot explain why, even though there was enough rainfall on board to ensure water for everyone, some slaves were tossed overboard and killed regardless. 4, no internal link. They don't get to weigh the sum total of capitalism's ills against the act, not only what we are responsible for, so they clearly do not get a warming impact because me and Courtois reading AF V3 is not the end-all, be-all of industrial production. Anything else links to a culpability DA because it holds black people responsibility for structures created by whiteness and capital. You should not value extinction first because it means black death is only valued in relation to common loss of humanity rather than the sum total of intergenerational loss and trauma for slaves. 6 or 4 or 5, whatever numbers are hard. 5, link turn. We should read these names as additional underwriters of the text to counter the recalculation of value necessary to speculative finance as a conceded 1AC line that highlights infinite debt to the dead instead of mutual indebtedness as the living and starting point for mutual aid. And social economics is associates a tear gas and rubber bullets DA to the alternative because we need a relation to economics that accounts for loss and trauma. Otherwise, it runs the risk of increasing anxiety and the like. And I guess 7 or 6, Hester is wrong. 1, pathology DA. Not everyone in debate can orient their production or their energy to the production of a better world explained above. 2, no presumption they have a one or politics or inevitable uniqueness of S-solvency explained above. 3, no link assumes we take 0 action disavowed by network solvency above and is just a pathological reading of 1AC cross-X because we didn't say we do nothing. LOL. 7, here Henry is wrong. 1, linguistics DA. They link to our knowability, internal link to our fungibility stuff. The idea that black thought is impossible to understand, so we should change it as a means by which black folks are forced to distort their thought to make it legible. 2, perm shields it because the alternative fiat's communism, which means that even if they want to link to the affirmative, it's like a perm double-bind style argument that the alternative institutes the material formation of communism, so it shields the link. Good one,
Okay. The first question, the overview of the case stuff, you said the affirmatives like paradigm shift allows for like forms of black revolution or black rebellions. What do those do and what do they create?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the point that we're gesturing towards in cross-X is that there's no real one, thing that we create. We're not like, we fiat this instance of rebellion. The whole point of the affirmative is that there is a certain illegibility to black practices of space making, which means that there isn't just one monolithic solution or one what do we do, but rather that the affirmative's activation of black psychic life opens up the capacity for those practices in the first place.
Well, you have said that there's like rebellion and insurgent practices fail in the status quo, and then you have said that the AF opens up ways for new ones. I'm wondering what's like distinct between the two.
Well, the reason those practices fail in the status quo is based on the internalization versus the embrace of pathology. So the status quo guarantees the internalization of black pathology, that black folks and white folks see black folks in those pathological lights. The affirmative says that we should embrace that structural position, which is the key distinction. Another thing to keep in mind is that the 1 and C on the case said wrong about the libidinal economy, not F didn't solve. So this line of questioning is a brand new 2 and C argument.
Okay. Sorry, I lost my place. The next question, just on the K real quick, did you read the Bledsoe card?
Then no.
Okay.
Not fast enough. 8 minutes.
Fair enough. The wrong about the world argument, I'm confused about the like what the Lord Mansfield argument like proves, because like the equitable distribution of resources is not like,
It proves that white people prioritize their desire over the law or logic. It would make financially more sense for you to transport more slaves across the Atlantic, because that would make you more money. But
I think additionally, it proves that there is always an impulse to manipulate the law in order to continue the degradation of Black people if there's some form of speculative value that is tied to white people's desires. Hence why Lord Mansfield did that despite it being against the law, and was able to effectively argue why it is valuable for him, given that Black people were not considered human.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
That's exactly what I was about to say. So no, I'm just kidding.
All right, I have like 5 seconds, so.
We'll use like TOC prep, so 10 minutes. Does that work with you all? Cool. We'll start prep now.
Reminder to all students who are part of the Zoom, but also students who are not part of the Zoom, that flowing is foundational. So hopefully you are taking the time during this preparation to go over your flow, to evidence that you were unable to read during the length of the speech. You were able to do now. This is an excellent opportunity if you were a judge that you would be doing this, right? Because debates happen really fast. So sometimes being able to read all the warrants and all the cards is not possible. And maybe another way to help organize that is cross-ex was focused on a particular set of questions where certain cards or evidence is being used as the warrants for this. Julie, break, was there a 2AC that was there was a 2AC? Can that be placed into one? I will forward that, but can someone put that in the Discord? Who do I think that's a you thing, right? Yeah.
Oh, my bad. I'm gonna need to hear that again.
Can you put the 2AC in the Discord?
Yeah.
Thank you. And then I will forward the 2AC to answer that question that happened. But yeah, cross-ex is focused on a certain set of questions that required a certain set of evidence. Maybe that's the evidence where you start to read whose evidence is responsive more to the arguments that are being made. Do these arguments matter? Do you think that they meet a certain threshold that you would need, for voting and evaluating? So just some, tips for, oh my gosh, all this stuff is happening. How do I begin to kind of think about what cards to look at? The answer is all of them, but I would definitely start with the controversies that are happening in cross-sex. Like the alternative, right? That's something that has been put up to question versus the alternative, the affirmative's solvency argument, right? Like, what does it mean to endorse thirst? What does it mean to the we that embraces that? What are these things? Another phrase that was thrown out that I would probably be flagging to read about more is this fungibility argument, right? This seems to be a really big argument from the affirmative that is like the big piece of offense versus not only the critique, but also the T-flow. So maybe flagging where is fungibility kind of mapped in both the 1AC, or if it's been spoken about a bit more in the 2AC, going to that evidence. I think it's the king evidence that's being referenced here for this argument. Looking at that, what does that mean? What does fungibility apply to the evidence mean? Think about how it's being applied to the critique. Think about how it's being applied to the framework / T-flow, et cetera, et cetera. And I do think that once you start doing this, being able to process kind of how to look at your flow becomes a lot more manageable. But now I'm also going to forward that over the 2AC doc for folks who are like, where is it? All right, just send it to you, Tommy. I guess also while we're waiting for Anna, anyone has thoughts about what's happening in the debate? Anything they want to kind of, talk about? Things you've observed? This is a good time to interact. No one has a single thought? No observation? Synapses not firing? So I'm going to need you to speak. Some observation, y'all. I do believe in call out culture. So I'm giving you the next 10 seconds to be individuals. Then in the next 10 seconds, authoritarianism is about to come in.
I'll invite somebody to even make fun of me as a comment. That might be an incentive. Y'all want to do it?
Please, let's do it. Thank you.
Please, I want the roast.
All right, guess I'm calling out. So let's see here. Cindy, give me a thought. What's happening in your head about this debate?
I'm just trying.
I'm sorry?
I'm trying to read my flows and see how the arguments are interacting with each other.
Okay, so trying to see how arguments interact with each other. Gabby?
I've been thinking about the framework thing and how they said that we meet the interpretation because it was disclosed. And I'm kind of confused about that, but I've been thinking about it. And since that's saying we meet the interpretation just because we shared our case before.
Okay, so you got some questions about that we meet?
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about to one more person. Let's see here. Luke, what's going on?
I thought, from what I heard, I thought it was kind of interesting how, the app kind of ties into language. Like this came up in 1AC cross-sex, how Quadro was talking about terminology, and I think I also heard it again in the 2AC, how linguistics plays into the app. I think that was interesting.
Okay, nice. All righty. Well, I will stop DJing. And yes, Julian, I do enjoy good individualism. I do enjoy that every now and again.
All right, now everything has been sent. There's so many things to send.
Oh,
So the order is going to be T and then case. We'll see if that works.
I'll be right back. Give me 1 minute.
Yeah, you're good. Cool. We're still waiting on Julian.
Sorry, had to steal some prep. I'm back.
No worries. All right, so the order is going to be T and then case. There is an overview on the top, just so you all know. It's not the longest in the world, but I would flow that before doing the line by line proper. Cool. Is everyone good to go? Right. Our interpretation is that topical affirmatives must result in the increase of the United States federal government's protection of water resources in the United States. They're wrong about debate. It's a competitive research game, not a speculative imagination project. Yes, debate shifts and changes over time, but that's because competition, strategy, and critical thinking all underlie how the topic is interpreted, and arguments are deployed in order to position ourselves to the ballot, activity, and research. The world and debate don't operate on separate planes and do implicate one another, but there's a distinction between ontology and cutting politics updates. Debate must reflect what's happening in the world, be it an endless struggle or not, because of the strategic advantage of recency, nuance, and in-depth research reward. The only meaningful constraint on any aspect of this process is topicality. It determines the lit base for all research and clash in addition to all controversy and strategic decisions. In their model of debate, the F unilaterally decides the contours of debate with no regard for the negative, because when you give any 2A an inch, they take a mile. Here's some top-level defense that applies to the rest of the flow before I get into the nitty-gritty. First, this debate is only a question of the resolution itself, which means in order to vote affirmative, you must be able to answer the following questions. How much ground will reliably be granted to the negative? What kinds of links can every 2NR go for? Are debates under their interp both limited and predictable? Whether debate upholds violent norms or how we relate to one another in the ballot are all questions you're going to forward as the cruxes of this debate, but you cannot equate solvency with topicality. Conflating distinct stock issues of debate itself as mixing burdens, which means A, their dissets to their R interp and case pushes are contrived in nature because no solvency article is written in the context of competing interps, and B, they do not meet the burden of rejoinder, and you can vote negative on presumption because the only way to determine if an F is a good idea, even in a world where you prefer reasonability, is one where they meet the stock issues, because everything else devolves into a discussion or model that is impossible to judge nor negate because there is no consistent bright line for it. Now I'm going to do the interpretation violation debates. Think of this debate as like a disad link wallet. In order to go for T and the 2 and R, I only have to prove a risk of one link to weigh my offense against the affirmative and for you to vote negative. They have conceded all of the interpretations from the 1 and C with 0 we meet claims, which means it's a question of competing interpretations of their interpretation versus ours. We have 4 different key interpretations that are not only precise but are hyper-specific to the topic at hand, while they have presented an interpretation that has no limits, has no intent to define or specify, let alone a connection to any words in the resolution. At best, this interpretation is a question of how debate writ large functions, which I've implicated above is incorrect, but also this card does not resolve any of the actual instances of violence that they have indicated are essential to making debate about, i.e. they are correct in the claim that Black people should be able to choose how they relate to water policy, but that's not a question of whether or not T is a good limitation to the ways in which people can do so. Black people can still have ways in which to relate to or change how water resources are talked about in the status quo to make sources of healing and community safety regulations, but that that's why our model of debate is essential, because that's what negative ground can ensure debates are about, which is why our model of debate solves the impacts in the net benefit of their counter-inter, but not the other way around. Also, their Cicerelli evidence indicates that the conflict comes before text, but that's a bad frame to use. Text matters. That's why all of our interps are hyper-specific. I'm going to extend them now because they create the basis for precision, which matters. Here is the first interp. A is the actor. Topical acts require the actor of the plan to be the USFG in Washington, D.C., which is comprised of federal bodies and agencies responsible for carrying out the operations of the U.S. The text of the resolution grammatically requires a debate on the hypothetical government action resolved. The colon and should indicate the debates about whether or not federal water regulations and protections ought occur. The affirmative does not meet their plan text specifies we as the actor, which is not only unclear but lacks a bright line and is infinitely regressive. Actors matter for predictable limits and ground division. 2 reasons. A is organization. Every successful movement and political orientation requires structure and stability and leadership and organization. Their refusal to meet USFG as the actor opens the floodgates to endless affirmatives that could fiat individual states, agencies, movements, people, and groups that make acts like Julian passing out water bottles to protesters in California, ending all dams, and certain Congress people voting on certain policies, all topical. That prevents discussions about water resources holistically throughout the United States, in addition to booting any debate over the specific mechanisms for change in the federal government, which at worst demotivates movements and civic engagement in Turin's case, because they can't improve material conditions without policy relevance. At best, they're palliative, since they don't change or challenge laws that allowed Detroit's water and sewage department to shut off water in the first place. Second is poor engagement. Stasis is essential to predictable clash of debates for the entire season. Absent a clear actor, debaters' research burdens are unchecked and require preparation for anything remotely water related. The actor determines the direction of research that debaters engage in prior to the season and throughout the year. Without a defense of the USFG, there are no sustainable expectations for negative debaters in the affirmative to walk into any debate and win, simply because of a lack of in-depth contestation over the affirmative's internal link, solvency, and impacts, which should be the core for the negative to not only predict but reliably engage, given the scope of the resolution. That not only turns their structural fairness arguments, but saps any educational potential of their model of debate, because argumentative resources are key to engage in conversations about water resources and shut down proponents of privatization of fossil fuels. Also proves we result in better subject formation, while their strategies result in cooperative storytelling, space making, and spirituality, because teams who don't have relationships to the topic will commodify others for the sake of a ballot, which saps any educational benefits and leads to whitewashing and cultural destruction. Next is the mechanism to be topical acts have to result in an increase in federal protection of water resources through governmental means. That includes addressing droughts, floods, oversight, supply management, quality control, infrastructure, and wildlife protections, which gives the affirmative plenty of ground, while providing a reasonable limit to debates by excluding mechanisms that do not fall under federal law, which matters because it enables the neg to have counter mechanisms like alt-right advocate eco-socialism and activist projects like Line 3, or policy-based reforms like state-based water protection and local reforms that target water disparities. Prefer and want to see evidence. Cody Schneider and team are specialists in natural resource policy, congressional jurisdiction, environmental policy. There's an intent to exclude and define as well, which means precision flows negative. Precision matters because it establishes the threshold for negative argumentation and link magnitude and scope. Mechanism outweighs and turns all their offense. Legal education isn't defending water policies and school failures, but rather allows for advocating for reforms that do challenge state-based violence or use the state against itself. Uniqueness flows negative. Youth political engagement forced Democrats to address BLM and family reunification that required political planning with a set goal in mind. It's the same with debaters who lobby for gun reform after Parkland. They don't meet this. 1AC Cross-Ex proves they present new methods and grammars for Black folks to embrace pathologization for healing, which that's distinct from a congressional policy or a federal policy of any means, but instead allows them to evade materially addressing conditions that allow for water access for commercial and industrial account holders to remain untouched by U.S. politicians, and British commercial law and modern finance capital to be shaped by the Zong case. They shift the debate to discussions of grammar and tribal strategies, which explodes the limits and boots topic-specific education, which makes all their topic-specific dissents irrelevant. That saps infrastructure, dissents, agency oversight, states counterplans, process counterplans, and links to water resource policy for large and specifically, which are good for fostering specific education that provides the grounds for clash with proposal implementation and insurance of all different policies. That's essential to knowing how and why water policies fail, which is key for movements and also for political activism writ large. And third is water resources. They defend oceans. That's not topical. They didn't have any arguments here, so I only have to win at risk of a link. First of all, that including oceans doubles the number of applicants, teams thousands of new miles of water, hundreds of new federal agencies like the Coast Guard, NOAA, Navy, and hundreds of new ecosystems at all different trophic levels and new advantages. I'm not going to get to case Gene, just so you know, to put that at the very bottom of your 1 and R. Also, ground doesn't include the states can regulate the ocean, which is why you evade the functional limit of the topic. 4 is jurisdiction. The oceans are not in U.S. jurisdiction. That's dropping the conceded internal link. It means the app isn't taxable and proves all of our education claims above, and why you make debate functionally unfair for the negative, because you not only create a new topic, but you create a new interpretation of water to begin with, which no one can ever negate because it's based off your personal interpretation of what water should be. Now the epistemology you just said, it doesn't answer the TVA, which solves because this efficiency framing is essential, and it's not about about being perfect, about having a possible way to engage the topic, which is why you can do things like to follow the demands of line 3 and actually have a federal policy, do things like address the different types of water inequalities in Detroit. It's also why switch sides solves the pornotroping decide, because you can read the K on the negative to indicate why KVK doesn't solve in the first place, i.e. you have to have those different links for in-depth policies discussion, which you don't have a mechanism for solving, and why force doesn't come before the body is all in the CAP debate, which means we'll answer that there, and KVK debates don't outweigh, because it's a question of having that specific education about reformism and whether or not we can suggest those policies in the first place to ensure for actual protections, because at the end of the day, those movements are the ones demanding for policies to be placed in the first place, which is all of the alt work that Gene's going to explain at the very end. And I already explained in his impact turn the claim that the competition doesn't matter above. Good for cross-ex.
Okay. Yeah, I'll ask about that. Kodraw, also this first one. Okay. You get?
Yeah.
Okay. First thing that the 2NC says is we are wrong about debate. It is only a competitive research game. Competition underlies how arguments are deployed. I want to ask about this in relation to the critique that is read. You've admitted you've strategically deployed this critique to win the debate. So why are you authentic revolutionary building and we are not?
Well, you also introduced the affirmative to win the debate competitively, I'm assuming. If you don't want to win the debate, I'm happy to take the win for Wake right now. No? Yes?
No, that doesn't.
The argument is you introduced arguments for competitive advantages. We did the same. All debate is introducing arguments to win different to have different strategies, because that's all how the topic is interpreted at the end of the day. Yes, we said the CAPK is a different competitive way of addressing the harms of the 1AC, but that's why it is a negative argument.
I think you're speaking over Julian's question. I would also like to know why kind of debate is only about that, when we've also made arguments as to how debate generates competition through the kind of interpersonal linkages that we make with the arguments that we're devising, or does that just never happen? Do those people not exist in this activity?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm sorry if I spoke over Julian. My volume, I can't really hear as well. But second of all, the argument we're making is debate itself is the competitive research game. You're right that people do have stakes in debate, and that you can create relationships. That comes from the very root of the game, which is the precondition. It means that the arguments we present and the strategies, let me finish because it's kind of important. The strategies that we deploy allow us to understand how we posit ourselves to the ballot activity and research, which is a precondition and a sequencing claim to that social capital argument you're making. Does that make sense?
I have I have two questions. One, what is the TVA?
The TVA was to address the water demands that your first piece of evidence indicates that are affecting the lack of water resources in Detroit. The 8-minute 2NC kind of killed it because I had a card I was going to read. That's my bad. But we've also indicated that different protest movements like Line 3 have actually advocated for federal reform, because it's one thing to recognize that Biden has dusted protesters, but the only people who can actually determine where pipelines are built or not built is the government, which is why we have indicated we should listen to demands.
What is competition?
Competition in the context of what? It's a big term.
What? You said competition is the only thing that matters. So,
in the context, sorry, I thought you were asking another question. But yeah, I made the argument that debate's a competitive research game. Competition is the sort of sequencing claim that we're making. It's it's the reason why you chose to read this affirmative. It's the reason why we're all here in the first place and can establish different reasons why a certain thing is true or not. It's also why you made claims like in the 2AC, this doesn't answer this test, or this doesn't answer this test, or here's a disad. You're also part of competition. It's just how we choose to engage that competition that matters.
Why competition matters? You never explained.
Competition matters because it's inevitable, and because it's what shapes our ability to make arguments and engage one another. It's a precondition.
Everything that you're already talking about.
No, it's a precondition for clash. Competition is good and inevitable.
I think the timer went off a moment ago.
Yeah, I was just answering Julian's last thing.
I sent a card. Let me know when everyone's good.
Give me a sec. I have to move my chair back down. Before you start, Jean, I'm just gonna put this in the Discord chat for everyone to have access to. All right. We should wait like a second for all of the debate critique debaters to pull that up.
Can we get some like Zoom reacts in the chat once you have that card pulled up? So far, I see 0. I see 2. So 2 out of 23. Okay, math. Okay, we're getting better in math. 5 out of 6 out of 23. Okay, cool. Once we hit 10, I'll feel good. Right now we're at 4. So how about this? Speak up if you don't have it right now. All right, if you're not speaking up, that means you have it. Okay. Let's do it.
Okay. Are the debaters good? Okay. I think that was everyone. If anyone's not good, just like verbally cut me off because I flicked off the screen. Cool.
Oh, Jean, give an order because they have to order.
Oh, it's the K. Okay, everyone good now? All right. Uniqueness first, capitalism collapses in the next decade. The only question is whether the left organizes to build communism or allows right-wing fascism to take its place in installing a global regime of white supremacy. That frames the question of prioritization of the space because a marginal risk they fail to unify the left is a reason to vote negative. Cap outweighs first. Things get worse. Right-wing militias monopolize power to prevent organization, which results in the slow destruction of all marginalized life forms and the inability to move under the heuristic of the 1AC. Second is extinction. Robinson evidence indicates that ecological collapse and multiple crises are inevitable within the coming decades, which shows the possibility to reclaim value to life as well as resulting in the slow material death of millions of billions of people. 2AC. One is the objecthood decide. The unitary assumption that the party is white folk providing for black folk is wrong and exactly what is criticized by the alternative. It's not just a group of people who are one unitary identity providing for another group of people who are another unitary identity. Rather, it is a unification of all these subcategories, which means it solves a vast majority of their offense better than they do. Their explanation is the altist affirm party organizing. Only a democratic centralist organizational apparatus can arm communities with communist theory and practice to connect local institutions building to a global decolonial movement. This requires a dual power strategy that organizes communities from within to build institutions that help people materially survive while supplementing reliance on capital as it crumbles. The alternative endorses movements like the Marxist Center Network that includes the Red Bloom Collective in New York and the African People's Social Party located in Florida. They build dual power through reparations, food and daycare programs, mutual aid, tenant organization, and agricultural programs that create solidarity across difference and build trust and collective power. Intermittently, that solves the AF, but not the other way around. If you can see the uniqueness question that should frame their altist as local fragmented politics like that for the bread and butter of the modern day left. Those micro politics prevent scaling upwards. However, even if thought is imperfect, it's the only option that is remaining. That the next argument is a permutation. Group them one. It's either severance or intrinsic. You should hold them to every part of the 1AC because there's no stable plan text for competition. Second, no perms of a method debate. That's key to education and advocacy skills. Making a choice between two independent advocacies against capitalism is key to iterative testing in actual activist circles. It's also a voter for fairness. Every part of the AF and law is permeable in method debates because any advocacy can be done next to each other. You should presume some opportunity calls to preserve stable negative ground. Third, links are disads. I'll extend here. First is the Henry evidence examination of the linguistic tropes of elections falls up short because it provides no heuristic for broader orientation. They leave the question of now what wide open, which allows the militant right to fill the void. Resilience has no method for resisting when the cops show up with guns and has no method for broader organization against the scheme of capitalism. Second is leftist melancholy. The first piece of 1 and C evidence. Fragmented focus as the status quo becomes absurd. Individualized politics, like the permutation articulated as you do you and we do us, and individual resistance to the narratives that portray blackness are insufficient and the status quo, which means the affirmative doesn't solve any convert negative on presumption. They fail to provide a broader heuristic to capitalism, focus on the individualized rhetoric of neoliberalism, which prioritizes resilience above all else and does not provide a broader heuristic for being able to challenge these things. The libidinal economy arguments were largely on case, but they're also wrong about them. Imperialism necessitated the racialization of different populations to create hierarchies that suppress labor. Racism was conducted to profitability. Differences becoming great because sociogeographic space became associated with certain people. Canfield and 16 critical race analysis is inadequate because it fails to identify any connection between specific failures of capitalism and the persistence of racism. The genesis of racial oppression can only be explained through historical analysis of forces and relations of productions. Imperialism is an essential dimension for the capitalism of production. The systems of spatial development and underdevelopment, a consequence of differential profits and ensuring domination by capitalism. Imperialism has been interwoven with racism. People become negatively racialized. They are associated with other socio-geographic groups. The other is relative and only racialized as a function of how their location figures in the socio-geopolitical ordering of capitalism. Imperialism is a global system of social stratification that correlates with racial criteria. Imperialist propositions are treated as culturally differentiated. The neoliberal ideology of the depiction of people of imperialist countries is mired in international culture. Mark that card at culture. The alternative is to I explained that above. The next argument is the next argument is the no internal link argument. That's not how the debate works. If the alt solves all of capitalism and the permutation solves none of it, then obviously you get the full value of the impact. The extinction outweighs argument was a blip in the 2AC. It doesn't make any sense. We explained above. Even if we don't win that, it turns the case because it makes racialization worse. The link turn argument, there's no impact to it in the 2AC. There's no reason why this solves or enables the permutation. The alternative solves it better. It's an insufficient heuristic because it only focuses on individual resilience, which was explained above. The tear gas arguments, the alternative solves them better by providing a collective organization metric to resist these things. Resilience and the changing of the way we internalize language does not, however, provide a way to solve the material impacts that are outlined by the disadvantages to law, which means it links harder to them. The pathology, decide, and all the rest of the arguments were largely explained above. The permutation solves argument was new to in our answers. If they re-articulate it, it was like a 10-second blip.
I think you all have 10 minutes because TOC timing. Cool.
Wait, I'm gonna call them really quick before we start.
Yeah. Okay, we on.
All right, y'all, while prep is happening, kind of the same things that I said earlier in terms of looking at your flow, determining what is, evidence to read. Maybe you're beyond at this point reading evidence because you've read all of it, or if that's not where you're at, definitely return back and start, reading it in the context of what is happening in the debate. Yeah, so other things is that we had a long, good 2NC on T that just happened and seems to be a big portion of the block, as well as a really robust defense for the K+FWK. So you kind of need to look at your flow and think, what is the strategy, right, that the negative can go for in the 2NR given the current affirmative responses, right? Right. So like, what were the kind of crucial points where you felt that the negative really emphasized because they understood that like this was a argument that they had to win? For example, on the T flow, think that Anna and them have to win that competition. Not only is good, but it's also what structures the kind of equity in debate. If that statement is true, right? If the negative wins that is going to affect, right, a large portion of the affirmative strategy, right? And so kind of thinking through who is ahead of that debate, what has the affirmative said that complicates it? What does the affirmative for you need to say in order to complicate that portion of the debate? And kind of dropping down to the cat flow, by no means is this a comprehensive, what are the check boxes for this debate. This is just me picking examples while also making myself a protein shake. So, you know, I'm in and out of paying attention fully to the debate. But for the cap flow, there seems to be a lot of discussion about the, you know, difference between the F and the alt, right? So do you think that there is a viable risk of a permutation, or do you think that the alternative and the affirmative are distinct enough, right? Other part was that the affirmative spent a lot of time in the 2AC kind of outlining why fungibility essentially link turns, or not link turns, but is a disad, right, to the critique. Do you think that the 1R's responses kind of mitigate some of this, the you objectify Black folks' bodies, labor, et cetera, arguments, right? This is all the linguistic stuff that's being discussed as well, just for folks who are looking for their flow to figure out where that is. But there's a large kind of discussion of linguists and how Black folks are kind of written into things based off of language. So do you think that the 1R, you know, has some good defense as to either A, why the alternative is best able to resolve that, B, that link argument not being, or not the link argument, but that disad kind of to the critique not being true or something that B, criticism creates, and C, does capitalism outweigh, or do the impacts of capitalism outweigh this pornotroping / fungibility / linguistics impact that the affirmative has been consistently extending throughout the debate? These are questions that you have to ask yourself, questions that you will kind of circle, like what does the affirmative need to check off in the box in order for you to feel comfortable with that? And same thing for the negative, depending on what the negative 2R strategy is does the negative close those doors sufficiently enough on offense to then go for whichever strategy ends up being the negative strategy in the 2R, either T or the cap K? Do you think that, and this is a question since, you know, I'm just DJing, you know, I'm just minding my business, talking. Oh, we're done? But I am gonna ask a question though. Do y'all think, you know, in this debate that there will ever, as a practice, should be a 2R that goes for both T and the cap K? I'm waiting.
I would say I think that they should probably split it up, but if they can like fit both in and still have some time to go over like answers to other stuff, then they probably could.
Okay, so that's one answer. We got another answer in the chat. No, double down on 1R. Any other thoughts? I think 1. Okay, anyone else? I want a few more answers. 1. For folks, so Annabelle, why do you say 1?
I think doubling it down, I mean, having it down to 1 will have it more efficient and you can go in more in depth. I'm not so sure though.
Okay, so I think a lot of folks are saying 1 in terms of depth and development and having impacts to arguments. So first, let me say, yeah, no, the 2R should not be going for both arguments. I think that is, and I don't think, you know, Anna was coming in here like, I'm going for T and the cap K. It's 5 minutes, y'all. I think y'all underestimate how quick 5 minutes, you know, happens.
I'm gonna have to change my whole 2R now.
Right.
I'm so excited.
No, I'm so sorry, but yeah, no, y'all. You, as a practice, if you were on the side of, let's see if, you know, Anna could be a super robot and just like spew out all these arguments in 5 minutes and fit both in. That is not the answer. You definitely want to go for 1 in the context of this debate, right? Of course, there are some exceptions in terms of other arguments that could have, like other arguments that are in negative arsenals versus an affirmative that don't start with a procedural and an argument. Same way in which we have told y'all that if you're going for T, like topicality, right, y'all, versus policy app, and you're gonna go for T, you're gonna have to go, and that's what you wanna go for in the 2R. It's not T in case, right? You like, in terms of the policy debate, right? It's not T in case. The framework debate's a little bit different, but you have to win your procedural is correct. Everything else on the debate does not matter if you win that the initial action of the debate should not have happened, right? Or not should not have happened, but there is a large strategy skew that makes the kind of outcome of this debate not evaluatable. That's not a word, but I just made it up. So just like, roll with it. So you definitely need to choose one. So we're going to see which one Anna chooses in this debate. I think a lot of it depends on this 1AR. The coup draw is about to drop down. We're going to see, if the doors are closed in these 5 minutes to force a 2-hour decision.
Oh Lord, 5 minutes.
It's different.
Let's see if I can do it.
I got faith. I got faith in everybody here. Once again, Jean has the advantage. 5 minutes. Let's finish the speech in 4. Give me a break for 1. College, sweating at the 4:59. I need that additional minute. It's a different kind of stamina.
All right, is everybody good? Julian, Anna, Jean? Wonderful.
Oh, wait, can you give me an order?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, true. Case, T, Cap.
Order. Will you say it again?
Yep, Case, T, Cap. Okay, is everybody good? Wonderful. The affirmative is a form of Black feminist epistemology that centers on the pathology of water to rewrite and understand how Black people come to experience water as a resource, not as something to protect, but as an element of survival that can be taken away and turned into capital. The loss of Black lives in the Zong charts a lineage of water resource protection involving hoarding and enclosing drinking water and other geographic sources of life for the purpose of extracting property and capital. Conceive fungibility impact means that we lack energy to practice organizing when faced with tear gas and rubber bullets when demanding water, houses, etc. The continual practices by which Black people are expected to adhere to things like anti-capitalism within debate through critique creates a savior logic whereby Blackness can be taught to save itself from Black death by instrumentalizing discussions of water in debate to prioritize capitalism and state socialist politics. Excuse me if I've accepted pathology or refused to engage comfortably with the negative and cross-examination. This is an example of prioritizing the fluidity of Black subjectivity, i.e. how you should consider every instance in which the status quo of debate and the economy is described without any reference back to the specific arguments generated by the affirmative means that you should be very skeptical if they have an actual link to the affirmative aside from reading topicality. The question of what it means to be thirsty with no water, how do you organize without being able to drink, how do you organize when you're thirsty for more energy? Our affirmative provides a blueprint for intergenerational psychic and material practices for responding to and disfiguring the negatives, understanding of the resolution and their move to speak past us, but in no case often means that we get 100% risk of solvency. This should set up the main argument that I'm going for on T, which you could go to right now. The inability to understand how Black people have to engage politics with no water and the move to speak over mystified Black life means that you don't get access to your argument, innovation, clash, or even switching sides argument because the concept of what Black people say is contorted and white people instead appeal to innocence instead of directly engaging to secure a ballot, which should be the framing issue for topicality and how they understand competition, i.e. their attempt to rewrite competition as being not about interpersonal stakes, but rather the game. Our argument is that debaters should use the resolution as a jumping off point, not as an endpoint, because the people are what define what competition is, i.e. the kind of desire to create new modes of engaging with one another in debate is exactly what leads to K+FWK debates with in-depth research practices, but the kind of divide between political grammars in which we situate and understand things like water is exactly what produces the affirmative as being supposedly unpredictable. It means that they don't get access to any of their predictability offense or their limits offense. Insofar as their only description of what a limited topic would look like would exclude Julian from giving water to people, which one, Julian should probably do that. That would be really nice. But 2 is not an example of what an affirmative would actually look like under the topic, utilizing the actual holistic, the kind of differentiating understandings of what water is under the topic. That means that the affirmative is predictable, it is engageable. There are multiple ways to critique it, i.e. already utilizing the capitalism critique. They could have read a critique of our understanding of water. They could have critiqued the kind of affirmation of perpetual thirst, but that kind of refusal to understand Blackness from anywhere other than the state is exactly what caused the failure of things like BLM and other social movements. They drop the tear gas and rubber bullets examples and the fact that you cannot organize when you're already thirsty, which means that we need intergenerational strategies that bring Black people together at the level of debate, but you prevent that and create a white playground of debate that makes it impossible for Black people to actually convene around each other. That also proves the negative epistemology just said, which was not properly answered. The negative script Black thought as a risk for white people's speculative values and enjoyment of fair debates where Blackness is instrumentalized as an abstract container of violence, whereby the lived reality of Black people becomes a race to focus on Blackness as an object that can be described. This there are multiple examples of this, i.e., the kind of fear of two ways, like two ways, like Julian taking a mile. When you haven't engaged the content of his arguments, the kind of example above, where they said that Julian would be giving water to multiple people. These are all attempts to negatively script pathology onto Black people prior to actually engaging the content of what those debates would look like, which means that you don't get access to any of your fairness offense. It also means that you kind of make it impossible to understand Blackness outside of any framework other than abjection that the state has to intervene on. Drop that leads to the kind of rubber bullets and tear gas example and doesn't lead to any state redress. Go to CAP. They drop the perm double bind of the culpability disad, which you should flow together here. They hold Black people accountable for the coming failures of the Communist Party to resolve environmental crises, which requires Black people to give up on creating strategies of survival in order to avoid pathology by being the good Black socialists for white folk in debate who only critique us. It means they can't solve their offense absent fiat, which justifies the permutation because the Communist Party should be stronger than one instance of debating about Blackness and water. It means that you should vote for permutation to both. They've also considered the object of disad, the case as an example, manipulating Black people through economic criticism to take away the ability to define the terms by which water and other fluid forms of anti-Blackness are experienced, which requires a coercion of labor from Black people to do more work that's not conducive to solving anti-Blackness. Teaches which also involves teaching white people to be less racist. Their analysis of capital is just an analytic that they use to get to material politics, which means if we have a better understanding of capitalism through our criticism, that justifies their permutation, but also means that they only give information to Black people. They expect us to create new forms of socialism without having water in the first place, which means that we will be too exhausted to actually participate in your politics. It means that there's no link, which means that there's no uniqueness for any of their link offense. They're also wrong, and we have a better analysis of capitalism that was mostly done on the case debate, but it means that economics relies on ensuring against Black freedom by manipulating space and language, which is a prior question to the material economy that they've utilized to understand things like micropolitics. Also means that it's not responsive, and means that their link offense is already a colorblind analysis that assumes that Black people fail to be unified with white people when those white people create racial divides in the first place. Also means that there is a drop of linguistics inside, which means that you frame Black theory as being impossible to understand when it is not accentuated within a paradigm of Marxist analysis, which was our gridability and knowability offense above.
Cool. We have 5 minutes. I'm gonna start that now.
Gene, you're getting a lot of love on the live chat. Favorite pink-haired communist is what one says, and I don't know what this means. Based, that could be. I don't know if that. That goes over me, but there's a lot of love.
So the order is going to be T followed by the K followed by case. Cool. Can I get a thumbs up from everyone? At least some of the lovely Debate Boutique students watching.
2 thumbs is not a good statistic, y'all. 3, 4. If I can hit 6, I'll feel really good. 7, let's do it. I want to just like amp it up. 7. No 7? 6 is the highest that we're gonna go. That's the okay. I guess I won't ask for mine. Say if you're not ready. Okay, then you're all ready. I heard you.
I'm gonna give the order again, just for all of you watching. The order is T, then K, then case. All right. Actor and mechanism education outweigh in turn the entirety of the affirmative. They've conceded our interpretation, which is that topical affirmatives must have require the actor of the plan or affirmation statement to be the United States federal government in Washington, D.C., and to have a mechanism that results in the increase of federal protection of water resources through governmental means. We have indicated what that entails, i.e. addressing the droughts, floods, oversight, supply management, quality control, infrastructure, and so many other policies that make AFGround possible to reinterpret water in the context of Black life, such that issues in Detroit and Chicago and across the United States can be addressed by a topical affirmative, but the affirmative has chosen to not be topical so as to evade any in-depth clashing or in-argumentation over the actor and mechanism, which is what allows for it and limits explosion and a lack of ground that makes the debate impossible to begin with. The impact we're going to go for is topic-specific education. It outweighs because absent an understanding of what makes this topic unique, all debate resolutions become the same and become moot, and takes away the only advantage of the game itself, which is learning how to engage in politics in a way that enables critical folks who want to take grassroots activism solutions to the streets and able to do things like know which pipes to bomb and which solutions will or won't work and when to advocate for policy reform, but also affects people who indicate an interest in wanting to engage the federal structures or state structures and engage local politics on multiple levels to create material solutions for people who actually need them, like those in the Line 3 protest, which are arguments that have not been handled correctly by the affirmative. They've also considered the TVA, which is a filter for all of the offense the affirmative wants to go for in the 2AR. They have considered that a sufficiency framing means they only need a risk to solve their offense to vote negative, especially because they haven't answered that just because the TVA might not be perfect, i.e. addressing water policy according to the demands of protest groups like Line 3 in Detroit and across the United States might not be perfect, but that's why a case neg solves all of those offense and why you can read the affirmative on the neg. But that also explains why competition non-uniques all their arguments. I'm going to get the line by line here to apply both of those arguments to the flow so it can clean up the debate rather nicely. First of all, they say Blackness is contorted and whiteness, we're appealing to innocence. One, we're not appealing to innocence, or rather we don't say why all of federal policy is good or bad. It's just that the federal government should have a role in managing federal and managing water resources, which is why the affirmative can indicate a positive change from the status quo. You don't have to defend all of the estate, which is why you don't appeal to innocence, but also competition non-uniques this because Blackness is going to be contorted by the affirmative and by negative strategy that they've also indicated that you can read. When Kudrow said you can read a K of thirst or capitalism, that's still going to link to those disouts, which is why they're the ones who utilize competition in the first place in a way that links back to their own arguments. But also Blackness isn't contorted by our arguments. It's not inevitable. It's a question of whether or not the TVA is capable of grappling with the demands of Black and Indigenous protesters who advocate for things like reinterpreting waters for healing in the first place, which solves the affirmative's impacts. Next, we don't rewrite competition, but rather understand competition as a prerequisite to the community interpersonal relationality, because it determines what arguments we say in the first place and establishes a metric for how we evaluate arguments when compared to each other, because that's inevitable in debate and also has to come first, because otherwise it makes debate always a question of what identity you're affirming, which makes
makes debate which makes stealing different identity groups and doing different and making offensive argumentation inevitable in their model, which only ours resolves. Now their counter-interpret links to limits and ground. I've explained that above because they don't cite a clear actor or have a mechanism that I've indicated. It has to be topical, but all of our evidence is more precise about and has an intent to define and exclude, which matters because it establishes a threshold for negative argumentation, length, magnitude, and scope, which I've explained is key for any argument that you are going to make to refute an affirmative, because clash is a precondition for any argument that can allow for a reshaping of identities. The K+FWK debates, they don't solve because you makes the permutation that makes all links tiny and also makes being topic-specific education impossible because you avoid any debates about regulation or water resource policy, which is what the resolution specifies. Political grammars is not an argument. You don't solve it. You don't say how, plus the TVA probably solves it. Yes, we do excess predictability. That's all the evidence that you've conceded. I don't need to reinvent the wheel here because stasis is the key to predictability, which I explained above. Now, Julian giving people water is not something you can debate. Yeah, Julian probably should give protesters water. That's why the negative can't say that's a bad idea, which is what you've conceded coming out of this debate. Plus, it's not a reason. You said it's not an example of the AF, so I don't really know what the AF does at the end of this debate because you don't have any tactics that you just defended. You just say you solve things, but you don't know how, which is why you can probably vote negative on presumption as well. You say the ground arguments I've handled above. Next, BLM didn't fail. Plus, epistemology just says none of these apply or reasons why the state's good or bad because they're reasons why that federal government should do something in the first place, and they don't need to from all of the state or reasons why it's not good or bad, or we're not pathologizing you, but rather we're indications as to why a positive change should happen and why those things can solve into moments of when Black folks don't have access to water, which are material conditions that do matter and come before any ability to actually weigh your argument, your affirmative in the first place, because it's a precondition to any sort of healing that can happen. And so whether or not you should be able to, whether or not we can engage you, whether or not how debate should be able to orient relationality to water in the first place, we can't say that debate is always good, and nor can we always say that water is something that people shouldn't have. That's reasons why the TVA solves your arguments, but not the other way around. The K, I'm not going for Prince has a competition. The offense doesn't apply because it's a question of T coming first, which is why none of their offense refungibility matters at the end of the debate, because it's a question of how we see grammars in relationship to the resolution, which we've indicated competition non-uniques and makes grammars inevitably chosen for one side or the other are biased because of the affirmative biases, which become structural, given the debaters who have an incentive to win and cheat at any cost that they have, which is why the TVA solves and why our model has the only limitations to what is and is not fair and predictable for debate to begin with. Cool.
Okay, I had 5 at the AT. I had 5 at no tactics. Just say you solve those things.
Mine had 5 just then, but I'm happy to make a permutation if you wish. It's just kicking out of the K. I don't really think that there's...
Sounds good.
Because my timer had 5, so... If you want to do it another way, that works too, Julian. We can...
I think we're all fine.
Cool.
All right, as we wait for the 2AR to happen, anyone want to kind of throw some thoughts out about the 2R? What y'all liked, what you observed, all the things? Whose hand is up? All right, Gabby.
I really liked that they pointed out that the app doesn't really have a material solution, and that people just changing their mindsets isn't going to solve anything.
Okay. Other thoughts? Wait, actually, let me double down on that one. So then what does that implicate, Gabby? Sorry, my voice is like out.
That they don't have an impact, that they don't solve.
Okay, so you like the stuff about how what portion of the debate are you tying that to?
Like what off?
Yes, I know the T debate, right? But yeah. I'm doing like a flowing comprehension test, right? So like, what was the argument that Anna goes for as to why the AF doesn't have a kind of real way or material way to resolve material impacts?
Because they basically only talked about Julian giving people water, I think.
Okay, Anna, do you want to clarify what this portion of the debate is that Gabby is talking about? this materiality AF doesn't solve for impacts, TVA potentially does. Is that, I'm assuming that's where that is in the debate?
Are you asking me?
No, I was asking Anna, who's, who gave the speech.
Sorry, one more time.
But yeah, the court, so I asked Gabby observation-wise, kind of what was the takeaway from the 2&R. And it's really like the stuff about two things. One, the AF is unable to solve for material impact. And this example or this kind of conversation about Julian handing water bottles out doesn't do the thing. So like that portion of the debate, your rationale for it, what it implicates, you know, that stuff.
That makes sense. So this part of the debate started when I was explaining the limits explosion argument about why actors and having actor stasis matters. So that was an example. K+FWK made that argument in the 1AR that that's something that is a good idea. It's not a tactic that the AF should necessarily endorse, but that it's a good thing to give people water, and that should be something that's up for debate. But the reason why I answered this in the 2&R as I did was to say, the point is, yeah, we agree, Julian should definitely give people water, but that's why stasis in actors matters, because it's not debatable to say that that's a bad thing, or to even really predict that that's something someone could say in a debate. We also made the argument that if that's not really a defensive tactic that the AF would say is part of their solvency, then you don't really know what is. They've just made assertions about what their model of debate or what their affirmative could lead to, but you don't know how, and you don't know what the different internal links between the solvency and impacts are. So this is a way of doing some kind of case debate, if all of you kind of saw that snuck in there, but also a way of explaining why our model is a better model of debate. So it was kind of a double purpose argument.
Nice, nice. I hope that kind of adds some more clarity. Thank you. And who has other thoughts about the 2&R? Things you maybe have questions about, or just, you know, observations, thoughts, anything. Words, preferably. Y'all know I call out, right? So it really comes down to a question of whether or not you want to make that choice for yourself, or I make that choice for you. All right, I make choice for people. Neon, thoughts? Yeah, you can't lean on the flow is disorganized. You still heard the debate, so I need thoughts.
Well, I think it's generally good. I mean, like I never really organize each sub point, but I have a lot on the flow.
Okay, so let me ask a more pointed question. What is in your mind the 2&R strategy, and why?
2&R strategies.
Why, what you received, right? What was the 2&R strategy and why? I kind of just said a lot of it already. So this is me once again kind of doubling down and reinforcing thoughts, right? But other things were said too that combined with that.
No clue. My flows do not make any sense.
Okay, so it sounds like we definitely need to do a flowing practice, which is fine.
I didn't flow last year, yes.
Yes, yes. Okay, so Luke, you said you wanted to go next.
Yeah, if you want, I could answer the question that you
Please.
asked me on.
I love my questions being answered. It really makes me feel good.
So, from what I heard, I might be wrong, but this is just what these are just my thoughts. But I think the 2&R strategy was to go for, obviously it was a framework 2&R. I think it was to go for the conceded TVA, and I guess sort of solving immediate material actions is more beneficial. There are people in Detroit that that don't have access to clean water, so we should focus on material impacts first, and And yeah, and I guess another thing that this isn't particularly related, but one argument that I heard that I thought was interesting was like this thing about how under the affirmative model debate, people will start running more offensive arguments because debate becomes like a model of like identity shipping, where people will sort of assume different identities just to win ballots. I thought that was a cool argument.
Nice. And does that sound pretty, where does that, in terms of your speech, does that sound pretty on point, or what are some things that you would like to connect?
Sure. Yeah, so that was an argument made on the line by line in the 2NC when it was sort of explaining the importance of stasis of our model and how it avoids that disad, but why it links to their interpretation, meaning their interpretation kind of opens the door for people to claim different identities or make potentially offensive arguments when the debate style that they're participating in is about personal relationships to the topic or about re-articulating different terms in the resolution. And because of competition being something true that is not only inevitable, but drives people to make different strategic decisions, that's kind of a thesis claim that I applied here. So as to say, because our competition claim is what it is, your interpretation opens the floodgates to this, which was something that the 1AR didn't answer from the 2NC, I claimed. But yeah, it was a smaller piece. It was more of a pushback on their interpretation to have a little bit of offense there, kind of like a little turn as a way for the lovely Debate Boutique student judges to understand the bright line between our interp and theirs. It's more of a way to kind of break the tie and establish that distinction.
Awesome. Any other last minute thoughts, questions, or before the 2AR, y'all? Nope. All right, Julian, are you good? Perfect.
Okay. T. Well, case T. Actually, put it all on one sheet. I'll just do the case on T. The top is a cross application from the critique.
Can you say that a little like more instructional for some folks, Julian?
It'll be all on one page. You should just flow it all on the T page. The first argument will be a combination of the case and an argument from the critique. And then I'll answer T.
So case, y'all. So like all in the same thing, but in terms of like themes, the AF is going to be extended. Like what is the AF? What does it solve for? Blah, 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 all that, right? Then there's a particular argument on the K page that the negative kicked out of, but the affirmative is bringing back in the debate, right? There's going to be something there that's going to make it to the same T flow that you're flowing everything straight down. And then the line by line proper stuff on T, so that the actual T debate will follow after. Got it? Thumbs up in the chat. Y'all on these numbers, I just really, okay, I'm gonna assume that we're good. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Gonna start in like 5 seconds. It doesn't matter if you lie about what the 2 and R will be. If you drop our impact turn to the K that says activism bad and go for an activism good impact framework, you should read the entirety of the debate or conceded fungibility impact, which has 0 2 and R breadth, absolves that externally we have decisively won that the negative instrumentalizes blackness and black folks in their performance, reducing black folks to what they can produce or how they can be saved. Our object code DA crushes framework. It is easily conceptualized as the AF1 condition and our theory. The alternative, how they want to train debaters, is a logic of white saviorism where activists are committed to dual power, things like, saving Detroit activate the revolutionary energy by listing out the inspiration for their activism, black anti-capitalists, and ethicalizing themselves by explaining what they do for black people. We create new accountability mechanisms. We provision resources to everyone. What can we do to save Detroit? It seems innocuous. It is actually the most virulent form of anti-blackness because black folks become the objects by which white folks can do subject formation. They conceded the back half of this double bind that if black folks do not commit to revolutionary world building, if they don't want to do activism or bomb pipes or can't because of trauma, they are pathologized, seen as a traitor to the race of the working class because they don't want to confront the police or have to work to pay the bills, which creates the conditions for labor extraction because black people must work fast and hard, which they've dropped double turns all their offense because it emphasizes productive logic. A key frame to evaluate our offense is that this is the only impact that either of us can resolve at the end of the debate. The negative doesn't make activism happen. The 2 and T says it's just a debate. We're all here for competition, and that's the only thing that matters. So it's not like they actualize the solution to warming or exploitation. However, the AF is compartmentalized to the debate. So given that they dropped the case in every speech, you can be certain that voting after political ontology of black folks opens up space making, which is an act that cannot be explained in terms of an example because its kinetic force is illegible, which we've performed by refusing comfortable engagement in cross-sex. What is competition? Well, it's good because it demonstrates that the negative is speaking past us. You should color your understanding of the activists that they produce, because how do they care for black people within activism if you aren't with them? You're with what they think that they want. The 2 and R overview. 1, what is the distinction between this framework argument and the cap K? It still links because we're impact turning activist focus. Niggas don't want to bomb pipes because we get arrested too. Ours is better because horizontally means more exposure to subject formation. If it is important to debate revolutionary strategies, then K debaters are better because they've conceded policy distorts political questions. So the debates are black people, not blackness. 3, no uniqueness. They've conceded our nigga epistemology DA, which is top level impact turn to their view of competition debatability. That was not sufficiently answered the question, how do black people organize for water when they are thirsty? Varied sets of political definitions organize our capacity to understand blackness at the level of being subjects rather than the objects, condensing blackness into a space of engagement whereby black people's lived experiences have to be contorted and denied in order for them to make spaces within white people's subjective interpretations of the topic. Understand every instance of them ignoring and failing to engage the affirmative is an attempt to sidestep class by modeling the affirmative as unpredictable for them, which they've demonstrated by constantly saying our arguments don't make any sense or they're impossible to understand, maybe to you because you're white, but obviously we're making coherent arguments, but not unpredictable for black folks writ large. This is especially important as in a concrete explanation of how or why debaters come together or pursue different discussions for strategies which internally turns competition flowing is important. They have said competition is a prerequisite for community. They have not explained how, instead saying that different identities steal from each other with no warrant or example, dropped that the motivating factor for people to engage the game itself is interpersonal networks generated through the act of debating and adhering to particular examples, which impact turns all their examples because like Detroit, to demand that black people make demands without water and get hit by tear gas and bullets, which comes in the form of exhaustion that cannot be redressed without the interpersonal strategy of the affirmative TVA. We don't want to read that. We don't want to read the TVA. The TVA doesn't have to be perfect. It does have to answer our offense. All of it is compartmentalized in terms of coerced labor and production, which means that if it's not something we want to say, it forces us to change our linguistics to fit their model, which is proof of our distortion argument. It also distorts political questions. Debates are not about blackness. They're about black people. It's not about revolutionary strategies of care. It's about how can we save black folks, which is our objecthood status argument is the dropped 2AC piece of King evidence, which doesn't receive any 2NC or 2NR airtime. Federal government extension 1, we do not use competition. Examples are not the same thing as saying fairness matters. They have said competition is the only thing that matters. It clearly internally turns our offense because if debaters only make arguments because it's what win debates, then they aren't translating those things outside of the debate, which means that going for a fairness frame for an activism type impact makes no sense. The stealing identity stuff is so ridiculous. It is inevitable. CV exists. Every white K debater thinks they're black now. The F solves it with our analytic because only embracement of pathology through the affirmatives analytic because only embracement through pathology through the affirmatives analytic gives black debaters a strategy to cope with that. The no clear mechanism stuff doesn't matter. You can still negate us. It's not the fact that it's not our fault that you read the seed, the political K, and didn't have link explanation. If this is true, when tough questions come up, the activists in the revolution will fail because things are too difficult to understand or too nuanced, which should cover lacking to in our internal link work to what their impact produces to make links tiny stuff is not true. There are good links in KPK debate, and the last stuff is you shouldn't vote negative on presumption if you don't know what our tactics. We said illegibility is good. We don't have to explain how we solve stuff. The 2NR, the block didn't answer the case. You never said we didn't solve anything. The only impact that either side of us can resolve at at the end of this debate is this pathology stuff. They said activism good. They dropped an impact term that says activism is bad. It's very
Good
simple.
debate. That was so awesome.
Good debate.
Good debate, y'all.
Good debate, everyone.
Awesome. Okay, my video is now on. In terms of the live stream, I'm talking to you all, not to the folks in the Zoom, to the live stream. Hello, hi, thank you so much for watching this debate. Hopefully you were flowing it or actively listening to it as something to help in, incorporate into your debating tactics, strategies, et cetera, et cetera. There will be an IG Instagram vote poll that goes up in the next 10 minutes. So hopefully if you're a critical thinker, you'll think about the debate and then you'll put in the AFNEG box. But how social media works, I know it's gonna happen, is that you're gonna see AFNEG and you're gonna think, all right, am I feeling like voting AF today just off of the word AF? And do I feel like voting negative just off of the word neg? I can't control that. I can just ask to try. But that poll will be going out very, very soon on Instagram. So make sure that not only are you following us on Instagram, but that you vote in that poll. So yeah, I'm gonna end that now, and then we'll open it up to questions for folks in the Zoom before we end this in